Welcome to the HFMA Talk podcast, the podcast for NHS finance. I'm Alex Hunt, Content and Social Media Executive at the HFMA. The HFMA recently published a report titled The NHS Finance Function in 2024, England. Produced every 2 years, the report provides a unique snapshot of the makeup of the NHS finance function in England and how it is changing over time. In today's episode, I'm joined by two of the HFMA's senior policy managers, Lisa Robertson and Emily Hopkinson, who will explore the publication, explain how the data was gathered, and discuss what it shows about today's finance workforce.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Robertson. I'm a Senior Policy Manager here at the HFMA, and I'm joined today for our chat by Emily Hopkinson. Emily, do you want to introduce yourself?
I will, yes. So my name's Emily Hopkinson and I am also a Senior Policy Manager at the HFMA, so I work alongside Lisa.
We thought it would be helpful to have a little chat about the Finance Function in England 2024. That's the report that we've just published, so do take a look on our website if you want to have a look at some of the graphs and visuals in there, which are quite helpful. But we thought at the point in time that we've just published it and taken a deep breath, it would be good for us to have a little chat and maybe draw out some of the key messages and things that struck us along the way. So I will, perhaps if it's helpful, give a quick introduction to what the census is aiming to do, and then we'll draw out the issues. Is that helpful, Emily?
That sounds good to me.
Excellent, thanks. So the report itself sets out the findings from the census, as well as HFMA staff attitude survey. The aim, actually, of the census is to provide a better understanding of the makeup of the NHS finance function over time. So it covers things like organisation numbers, staff numbers, pay bands, qualifications, the roles that finance are working in, and then diversity statistics around gender, ethnicity and age. It's run nationally every 2 years. It started back in 2009. So I think the real value actually of the census comes from, well, both the 100% response rate that we get along the way and the ability to step back and take a look at the finance function over time. I think that is actually really helpful. The Skills Development Network do run the census, and then the HFMA use the data to provide an analysis of that, and that's what you can see in the report. And I do know for many people, the process of completing the census is not simple. It's very time consuming, can take a lot of effort to gather the information. So I think Emily and I both wanted to say on behalf of HFMA and SDN, a massive thank you to all of those that have been involved in making this possible. It really is helpful to see that come to fruition.
Absolutely, yeah. I come in near the end to do the analysis, and I'm not as aware as to what happens early on. So how does it run in terms of collecting the census data and who's involved?
It does vary across the country, and the SDN, as I said, run the collation itself. So for some organisations, they collate the information individually and submit that. In some areas, the SDN leads have a more detailed role in gathering that information. So it does vary across the country. But I think in reality, for most people, it's a bit of a combination of using the data from ESR, walking around their finance functions, gathering that information together and submitting it. And it can feel like quite a manual process. And I know it's something over time that we've been looking at how can we streamline that as much as possible. There's sort of a dynamic between trying to keep the same questions each time because you get that longitudinal approach with then reflecting on how we can improve the questions and change them. So sometimes we can have really good ideas about how we might want to change the information we gather, but it's really trying to balance that with not losing that time series approach to it, I think.
Yeah, we came across those kind of questions this year, didn't we, when we said, it would be really helpful to know this, and then you go back to the previous years and you think, oh, that won't quite match up, and it's probably more useful to get that time series.
And then alongside that, because that's very much factual based information, I think the staff attitude survey is really helpful because that supplements the data with a bit more subjective areas, so things like career paths, morale and development needs. So I think that's really nice to give a little bit of flesh to the bones on some of the statistics that we see coming through.
And that's separate, isn't it, to the census? So it's filled out separately.
Yeah, absolutely. So we run that survey we ran it in autumn 2024, and so that is always important to reflect on at the point in time the survey is run, because obviously since November things have changed dramatically in the world of NHS
They
finance, and
have, yeah.
they ever will, I think.
Mhm.
So it is a snapshot in time. So it is worth bearing that in mind, I think, when we're looking at it.
And what do people get out of the census? If you're an NHS organisation, what will you get out of the census when you're looking at the results?
Yeah. So I think there's loads of different ways that people tend to use the results. I think they're used locally, they're used regionally, and they're used nationally in kind of different ways. But from speaking to people that have looked at the results locally, it is trying to get a sense of where you sit compared to the rest of the country. Does it feel like your finance function is similar in terms of what other people are doing qualifications wise, whether that's the roles that you're using, flexible working arrangements, that kind of thing. I think when we'll come on to this perhaps in a little bit, but we do send out some individual reports to organisations as well, which are really useful in terms of benchmarking against other positions. But all of this data is really kind of a diagnostic tool, I think, to get a sense of
Hmm.
how you compare to others that are similar in size and type around the country. But also, I think that's one of the things that always strikes me is we come up with the figure of, I think, something like 15,800 or just over of people working in NHS finance. It's a really big group of people that are all pretty much have a common goal, common approach, and there's basically a huge peer group for everyone, isn't there? And I know that's something the HFMA really works well with. So I think having that sense of being part of the finance function in itself and seeing what that looks like is really helpful for people to feel like they belong.
Yeah. Yeah, because you kind of work in your own team, and just to kind of open that up and see who else is out there is useful. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So well, I think we touched on it a little bit, didn't we, Emily? But one of the big tasks that you have, and I'm glad that Emily does this and not me, is the detailed analysis of the data that comes in. So we get the data towards the end of February this year, I think it was. And then the first step for you, I guess, Emily, is to look at what you're getting in and the best way to analyse that and show it. It might be helpful if you can just explain what you do when you're faced with that big data set as it comes in.
Yeah, sure. So step one is to check that we've got all the organisations we expect to have in there, which we did have this year. We had 100% response rate, which was really good. It's slightly more complicated than it might sound, making sure you've got everyone in there, because there's different joint returns, and some organisations submit their results slightly differently. So it takes slightly longer than you might expect to make sure we have all of the right people who have responded. But once we've got that sorted, then there's some basic data checks. The basics like, are there any negative numbers in there? Then that would be a problem. If your head count is lower than your whole time equivalents, for instance, and that would be a problem. So picking up things that are clearly errors before we get going with the analysis properly. Once we've done that, and there might be a little bit of back and forth there with some of the organisations who have submitted data to make sure we have got the right data to work with. But once we've done that, then we start to have a look about what we want to get out of the data. And the helpful thing about having done this census and analysis in previous years is we've got a good idea of what we can get out of it. And because we're trying to do these time series, a lot of the time it is rerunning the analysis for this year and seeing how that looks compared to other years. And then there's some work to kind of generally look at what else is in there. If there's anything that's particularly interesting this year that's different and that we might want to bring out in a different way. And as we go through that detailed analysis, there's kind of the odd extra niggle that comes out, because once you start looking right into the detail, then you find some other little oddities here and there. And again, it's judging whether or not those are things that are disruptive to the messaging. Is it something that's material, or is it something where we need to go back again to the organisation submitting? And it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But I have to say, on the whole, the data quality has been really good this year. Actually, there hasn't been a huge number of issues, which is really helpful for us when we're trying to carry out that analysis.
I think that makes a big difference, doesn't it? When we play back the results to people, especially in the individual reports, we really want people to recognise what they've submitted, and I think that's definitely improved every time we do the census. So
Yeah.
again, a big thank you, I think, on that one. But the other area that you do some adjustments on as well, isn't it, where we don't have some information disclosed? So I know there's some
Yes.
elements with gender and ethnicity that you do. Is it worth mentioning that, I think?
Yeah, so we do analysis on diversity stats on gender and ethnicity. Some organisations and some individuals don't choose to disclose their gender or their ethnicity. And so we take out any non-disclosures before we run the analysis. So you'll find there are slightly different numbers running through the different versions of the analysis. So on gender, we've got kind of one set of people who have got their gender disclosed, and on ethnicity, we've got another set of people who have got their ethnicity disclosed. So if you spot that there's some slight differences in terms of your overall head count through the analyses, that's what's happening there. You've got the non-disclosures being taken out so that we can give say an overall percentage of how many staff are female. We want to remove those for which their gender is not disclosed.
And that's really improved, hasn't it, over time, especially I think with ethnicity, since we think we started recording ethnicity maybe around 2015. And I'm sure the non-disclosure rate was much larger then than it is this year. So definitely the trajectory is much more accuracy.
Yeah, it is improving, which is helpful for our analysis and helpful to understand what the makeup of the finance function is. So really helpful.
The other way that we tend to cut it when we're looking at it is between what we call core NHS organisations and non-core NHS organisations, isn't it, Emily? Do you want to say a little bit more about the distinction between those and why we do that?
Yeah, so core organisations are integrated care boards, NHS trusts and foundation trusts, the commissioning support units, and also NHS England's regional teams. And the organisations which are non-core, there's various different ones. There's people like local audit organisations, there are community and social enterprises, there are a small number of subsidiaries, some national organisations such as NICE and the and NHS Business Service Authority. And the reason that we separate them out is for that long-term trend. So we've got the data for the core NHS organisations across since when we started the census in 2013. The data on the non-core is a bit more hit and miss. So we have some organisations, but we don't have all organisations in each of those years. So comparing non-core over time is not particularly useful because it's disrupted by organisations joining the census, leaving the census, missing organisations, whereas the core organisations, the core NHS, we've got a consistent picture across time. So we like to separate them out so that we can show that long-term trend.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite helpful, isn't it, to make the comparison between the core and non-core sometimes in some of the areas. So I think that's quite helpful.
The HFMA Members Summer Series is back. Following a record-breaking turnout in 2024, this free event is back for its third year, running online from the 17th to the 19th of June. Designed exclusively for HFMA members in bands 2 to 6, the 3-day online event brings colleagues together from across all 13 HFMA branches. Expect expert talks, career development insights and networking opportunities with fellow finance professionals. Plus, with on-demand access for 3 months, you can catch up anytime. Don't miss out. Register yourself or your team today for free. Head to the link in our show notes to sign up. Back to the episode.
It's probably worth us thinking about what the key things that were struck us as we were looking through the analysis. And I've already touched upon the size of the finance function, and there was a small rise from 2 years ago in terms of the finance function itself. And it's actually been quite a quiet year on reorganisations, with the ICBs being in existence in the same way to 2022 to now, and just a small movement in providers. But was there anything that particularly struck you, Emily, as you were pulling together the analysis?
I might talk a bit about the diversity stats, but I wonder if first it's worth us going into a bit more detail on that change in headcount. Do you want to just run over what the figures were in headcount, and then perhaps we could talk about whole-time equivalent as well?
Yeah, so you're right, Emily. The kind of overall increase of 2% in staff numbers since 2022 covers a lot of different movements up and down between different organisations. There have been decreases overall at NHS England regional teams, at the commissioning support units and the ICBs. And a lot of that does reflect the movements in specialised commissioning responsibilities from NHS England, regional offices to ICBs, the work that ICBs have been doing in cutting their running costs and that kind of thing. There also have been increases actually at providers across all sectors, ambulance trusts, mental health and community and acute trusts. And actually looking at some of those numbers, it's not always a direct comparison or a direct increase, because in the background you have got some changes in terms of the teams that are included within the finance department. So payroll, for example, is one that often moves into the finance department, gets included. Sometimes that's been covered by a different department in the organisation in the past, but increasingly that comes under the finance remit. So sometimes there are nuances around services that are being hosted or departments that are included within finance. But overall, I think when you step back, you can see it's kind of a steady picture for finance function together. So it's always the way, I think, when you look at the census, is where people sit may change, but actually overall the numbers are relatively steady.
Yeah. What struck me is that although there looks like there's a bit of a increase in headcount, when you look at establishment and you look at whole-time equivalents, there's less difference. So the establishment between 2022 and 2024 has barely changed. I think it's changed by about 2 people. And we've got a slightly bigger whole-time equivalents, around about 200 more. But when you go on to the headcount, you've got more again. So it's kind of each level you have a slightly different picture.
Yeah.
But overall, not a massive change.
No. And I think the other thing which is really interesting that ties in with the whole picture, or kind of jigsaw as we put it together, is around the vacancies and the use of agency staff. So vacancies have gone down, you can see in the census, and there has actually been a significant reduction in agency staff and staff that are seconded to support projects. That's gone down 67% from 22 to 24. So the way that people are operating is different as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, the reduction in agency staff and secondees as well. I'd love to know more about that. All we can really say is that's what we've been told, that's what's been reported in the census. We can't really speculate much more on why or how that's happened or what it means, but I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, and it gives us as a team at the HFMA some areas to delve a bit deeper into following on from that. So it's things that we can pick up on, and you might find us coming to you for, how does that work in your particular team, and case studies and examples that I know our members really benefit from when we delve a little bit further in. But you're right, the census, as we report it at this point in time, is pretty much factual. The staff attitude survey then gives it a little bit more kind of qualitative background to that, and then it also does lead us into a little bit more direction in terms of the areas that we might want to do some further work in, which I always find. So it's kind of not an end game. It is a position that helps inform what we do, I think.
Okay, should we talk about the diversity stats? Because I know that that's something that people are really interested in. So the general message is that women are more likely to be working in lower grades, and people from ethnic minority backgrounds are more likely to be working in lower grades. So if we look at the providers and commissioners, 61% of NHS finance staff in these organisations are female, but 37% of finance directors are female. And then in terms of ethnic minorities, we've got 74% of NHS finance staff at providers and commissioners are white, but 92% of directors are white. So there's quite a big difference between the overall diversity of the staff body and then at those more senior levels.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to note that the picture is changing over time, isn't it? So there is definitely a greater proportion of females working at the director level and similarly from ethnic minorities, although much more so in terms of gender. You can see the change over time, I think.
Much more so in terms of gender, yeah. So if you look at gender and you look back to our first census in 2013, at that point, 27% of directors at providers and commissioners were female. So that's compared to the 37% now. So that's a 10 percentage point improvement. The difference in terms of ethnic minorities, I think, is more disappointing. So 92% of finance directors at the moment are white. That's been the same figure in this census, the one before in 2022, and also the one before that in 2019. So no real changes over the last 5 years, which I think is more disappointing.
And I think But we break that down quite a lot in the report, don't we, in terms of different groupings, so providers, commissioners and CSUs, and then individually for each, and then also looking at the overall core NHS organisation. So you'll probably see in the key messages in the report slightly different numbers, but the same trajectory. So I know in terms of overall core NHS organisations, the percentage of female directors was 39% this year compared to 33% in 2022. So you'll probably see it in the report chopped and changed in different ways, but the trajectory is the same, I think. And then, as we mentioned earlier, we do send diversity metric reports to individual organisations, both providers and ICBs, with a few graphics in there that compare individual positions to other organisations and the national picture. And that really is intended to be a conversation starter for people to use in their local areas to make sure they understand their position and why things are different to other people, and whether there's some action that needs to be taken locally. But Emily, did you want to explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's these individual reports that we send out to ICBs and trusts and foundation trusts. So as Lisa says, you can then see where your organisation sits compared to others. One of the most useful things I think in there in terms of diversity stats is that it takes some Office of National Statistics data on ethnicity in your local population. I think in an ideal world, our finance teams would look pretty similar to the populations that we serve. And in terms of the kind of different ethnicities in different areas, that's quite different in different parts of the country. So one of the things that we do is we look at how your population looks in terms of ethnicity, and then how your finance team looks. So you can see in terms of your local area, does that look representative or does it not?
Yeah, and people have found that really helpful in the past, I think. So those will be coming out during May to individual organisations. And then I don't know if I want to touch very briefly on the staff attitude survey and some of the key messages and things in there that jumped out at us, really. As I mentioned before, the staff attitude survey is a survey we ran in November 2024 to supplement the census. We had nearly 600 respondents to that from England, and it did present quite a mixed picture of job satisfaction and motivation across the country, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty much reflect challenging times and different circumstances for everyone, don't they, Emily?
It does, yeah. I mean, I think job satisfaction is generally fair at about 6.6 out of 10.
Yeah.
But there's a significant tail of people who are not satisfied in their work for various reasons, which comes out in some of the free text comments, which we do then reflect in the report as well. I don't know if you want to kind of explain a bit more about that, Lisa.
Yeah, I mean, there are quite a lot of opportunities for people to put their comments in, which is really helpful and the point of the exercise. And you can see overall, whilst there is a mixed picture, generally speaking, NHS finance staff are happy on the whole with the opportunities that they get for career development, how they feel they add value to their organisation, and overall job satisfaction, as you said. But there are concerns around things like increasing workload, reducing capacity, the continuing financial challenge. And I think every time we do the survey, they do become more prominent. And I don't think that's any surprise in terms of the context that people are working in at the moment. But it does always amaze me how many comments we do have in there that are so positive, especially things around support people get from their line managers, why they want to work in the NHS. It really does make you smile when you see and read of those comments that come through.
Yeah, often people will say, I really appreciate my line manager or my director of finance is really brilliant or that kind of thing. And I don't know the individuals they're talking about because it's anonymous. I don't know who they are, but it does warm you, doesn't it? Seeing those kinds of messages. Yeah.
I think that's probably a really good place to kind of wrap it up in terms of going back to your first question, Emily, around what were we trying to achieve with this. It does give you a snapshot in time, doesn't it, in terms of what does the finance function look like? How does it feel for people working in the finance function at the moment? And I would say that the one consistency over time has been that it changes every time that we do it. And there's always been something in terms of the position or the organisations or the services that are run that are different. But it does always demonstrate, I think, that we are part of quite a large finance community, and for everyone out there doing the work, there's someone else doing the same thing somewhere else in the country as you, and it's really kind of nice to see that. And I do always think it's quite comforting for people to know that there are others as part of that kind of wider finance community that they can turn to in difficult times.
One of the things that kind of that leapt out to me when I was reading some of those free text responses, and it comes out in some other questions we ask as well, is about people's motivation. It comes through really strongly that people are motivated by a sense of public service, that they feel like what we're doing is making a difference to patients and to the people who kind of live around us. And that came out really strongly to me in those comments, and also the questions where we ask what motivates you, and that's easily the strongest thing coming through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably a good point for us to stop talking. Otherwise, we could talk all day, really, Emily.
We could.
Yeah. But hopefully that's been helpful. But I would encourage you to go and have a look at the report itself, because I do think it lends itself to the graphics and some of the visuals if you want to get a sense of some of the key messages that are coming through. So do take a look at that. But for now, Emily, final thoughts?
I would echo that. Definitely have a look through the census. We've tried to make the graphs, so they should be pretty easy to just skim through and get the messages from them. Have a think about how your organisation fits into that, if there's anything in particular that stands out, and look out for those detailed organisation level reports that will be coming out soon.
Thanks.
Thank you to both Lisa and Emily for their insights into the report. An infographic has also been produced to summarise the key findings from the report. You can find this, along with the full report, on the HFMA website, which we will link to in the show notes. That's it for this week's episode of HFMA Talk. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to leave a 5-star rating on your favourite podcast platform. See you next time.